She told me her name was June, that she was free, and that the bruises on her neck came from a fall in the tub, until the night I learned she had a husband with a badge, a new name tucked in her wallet, and my child growing under a coat I'd given her on a cold Georgia morning. Hey there, folks. If you're new here, welcome to After Her Lies. I'm Hank Mercer, and I'm an old man with a camera and a box of letters that still smell like gasoline and rain. Before I dive in, do me a kindness. Hit subscribe, will you? 96% of you watch these videos and don't subscribe. I see the numbers, and I'll be honest, it makes this old heart sag like a wet clothesline. Give this a like if you can, and comment at the end. Tell me what part of this stuck to your ribs. It helps more than you know. Now, June. That's the name I met first. It wasn't the name I buried in my chest like a coin. It sure wasn't the one on the birth certificate that would find me 40 years later. But it's the one I still say in my sleep sometimes, when the middle of the night sounds like highway tires and the clink of diner spoons. Back in 1981, I was 21 and already going bald at the temples from my father's side. I worked at Bill's Sinclair on the south end of Lima, Ohio, right off the tracks. Mornings, I'd roll up the bay door, drink black coffee that tasted like hot pennies, and tune the radio to whatever would drown out the whistle of the plant across town. I liked engines. They told the truth if you knew how to listen. Belts screamed when they were loose. Bearings rattled when they were ready to go. People were harder. She pulled in one afternoon in a sun-faded Mercury Cougar with Georgia plates and a fender held together by a prayer and 2 coat hangers. The hood popped like it had learned English 3 owners ago. She stepped out with that kind of careful gait that tells you someone's trying not to be seen even while they're standing in daylight. Her hair was the color of sweet tea with too much ice melt. Her hands had scrapes that said she'd tried to fix something herself. She asked if I could look at the radiator in a voice that sounded fine until you noticed the gravel hiding underneath. A long time ago, I would have asked questions like a nosy neighbor. But that day, I just said, "Sure, Mom," and leaned in. The radiator looked like a colander. I told her she needed a new one, and maybe a new car while she was at it. She laughed, a sound like a window finally opening, and said if I could make it last one more week, she'd be grateful. I said I could try. She sat in the waiting room on the cracked vinyl couch, flipping through a family circle from the previous Christmas, and I watched her reflection in the office window while I poured stop leak like syrup. Her blouse collar was pulled high. Ohio heat will make you pull a collar down even if you ain't got shame. She kept hers high. That told me more than I wanted to know. When I finished, I told her it might keep her out of trouble for 7 days. She told me her name, June Palmer. She said she was headed to see an aunt in Detroit. When the words left her mouth, they hung in the air like they weren't sure where to land. I smiled, handed her back the keys, and said keep an eye on the temp gauge. She asked how much it was. I told her she could pay me by letting me buy her a coffee across the street at Bluebird Diner. She looked at me, really looked at me, measuring kindness against risk. Then she said, "Okay." The Bluebird had greasy windows and a server named Dot who could smoke and pour coffee at the same time without burning an eyelash. I sat across from June in a red booth with a rip near the corner that grabbed sweater threads when you moved wrong. June took her coffee with sugar and cream and both hands wrapped around the mug like it was her first warm thing in a month. We talked about nothing at first. Weather. That peculiar Lima stink you get when they crack something open at the refinery and the whole town comes smelling like pennies and eggs. Then she asked if I ever wanted to leave. Not Lima, my life. I said sometimes I imagined a road with no starting point and no last exit. She gave a little half smile and said, "Maybe those are the roads that find us." Or maybe those are the roads we find when we've run out of money and patience. I didn't know what to say, so I said something dumb about how the grease traps at Bill's were overdue. She laughed again. The sound relieved something in my chest I didn't know was clenched. When we walked back to her car, she jerked when a siren whooped somewhere a few blocks up. It wasn't close, just some city noise, but her whole body flinched like it had muscle memory for fear. She saw me see it and straightened. There's a point where a man either asks a question or looks away. I looked away. Not because I didn't care, but because caring without permission can feel like an ambush. She drove off. I watched her taillights blink out at the light. I could have left it there. 9 out of 10 times in life you should. But then 3 days later, the cougar limped in again, steaming like a cow on a December morning. June slid out wearing my old army green field jacket I kept on a hook by the door. She'd forgotten to give it back after the diner. The sleeves were too long, and on her they looked like a boy's coat on a woman who never got to be a girl. She said she tried Detroit and it didn't work out. Her aunt wasn't home or wasn't answering. She said she thought maybe she should head south instead. I told her south was a long way to go in a car that thought every mile was a favor. She said she'd drive it until it wouldn't drive anymore. A person will tell you a lie about the future when they're out of choices about the present. I didn't know that then. I just knew I had 2 arms and a restless heart and a boss who only checked the books every other Thursday. I told June if she could wait until my shift was over, I'd drive her as far as Cincinnati. She looked at me like I'd offered her a slice of the moon. We left before dark in my '73 F100 with bench seats that smelled like oil and peppermints. June kept my jacket. The weight of her beside me was a kind of gravity. We crossed the Maumee, and then we crossed into something wider. The idea that you could start an entirely new story with 2 good intentions and $8 in a Folgers can. I won't give you a mile by mile. You don't need a Rand McNally of a foolish boy's heart. But I'll tell you this. Outside of Cincinnati, the sky turned the color of a bruised plum, and we pulled into a motor court with doors that opened right onto the parking lot. June registered under the name July. I watched her hand write it clean as a church ledger. It felt like a joke and not a joke at the same time. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and old cigarettes. The bedspread had a pattern like a migraine. I laid my jacket over the one good chair and asked if she wanted the bed. She said we could share it. That's when she told me the first truth I believed. That she hadn't slept through the night in months, and sometimes you can sleep if you know someone else is listening to the dark. I didn't touch her that night. I know what stories like this usually do at the turn of a page. But picture a young man who has only ever held wrenches and the hems of his life. Picture a woman whose shoulders had learned smallness. I lay on top of the covers beside her and watched the light from the lot paint the ceiling. At some point, her breathing fell into a rhythm like waves. It was the first music I ever loved. We made it to Chattanooga the next day because a trucker named Frank taped up her radiator with a patience I still think about. We ate boiled peanuts from a roadside stand that tasted like the ocean if the ocean had been boiled in a pot with someone's rent money and a pocketful of faith. I told her about my father who died a year before from a heart that never idled right. She told me her mother ran off when she was 12. When she spoke about her father, she said the words like she was reading them off a paper she'd long since set on fire. In Macon, we stopped at a pawn shop so she could sell a locket. She pressed it into the man's hand and looked at the counter like maybe a different life was hidden under the glass with the guitars and watches. The locket was cheap. The man saw the tremble in her and knocked $1 off his lowball. I hated him and loved him for it. By the time we hit Savannah, the air did that jellyfish thing where every step leaves a damp print. We didn't have a plan. The plan was forward. We drove to Tybee Island because I had a postcard in my glove compartment from a cousin who'd been there, and because the word Tybee felt like a promise. On the pier, the boards thudded under our feet, and the water wore the horizon like a hat. June stood with her back against the railing and closed her eyes. The wind tried to take her hair. She let it. That night in a motel with a rattling window unit, I brushed the hair off her forehead and told her I could go wherever she needed me to go. She didn't answer for a long time. Then she looked me dead in the face with a calm that made my bones quiver and said, "Hank, I gotta tell you the truth, because if I don't, we're stealing hours from better people down the line. My name isn't June, it's Lila. And I was married." The word was married. The way she said it, you'd think the whole world changed tense. I'd always assumed marriage was a ring and a ceremony, and then years of deciding who did the dishes. I hadn't considered what it looked like when a woman said it like a confession and a dare. Lila told me she married a man named Roy Hart in Waycross, Georgia, when she was 19 because he was solid where her life was liquid. She said solid can turn to stone and then to chains. She said Roy was a sheriff's deputy who liked to teach lessons more than he liked to keep the peace. She said the last lesson he taught left fingerprints on her throat and the mirror shattered. And when she went to the hospital, she used a false name because that's what the nurse told her to do if she wanted to walk out. She looked right through me then, like she was measuring the size of my belief. "Do you believe me, Hank?" she asked. I said I did. I do. The old men in town who used to sit outside the hardware store would tell you that a boy will say anything in the dark, but there wasn't any darkness. We'd turned the lamp on because we were tired of shadows. She told me she'd come north because she thought if she could clear her head, she'd decide whether to file or to disappear. She hadn't decided. She hadn't known about me. She said I'd surprised her by being still. I asked what she meant. She said, "You don't push. A woman remembers the direction someone pushes her." I told her I still wanted to keep going. Pick a town where Roy Hart didn't wear a badge. Pick a name together that wasn't borrowed, and I'd make enough money turning wrenches to feed us both. She said it wasn't that easy. I said I didn't mind hard. She laughed at that in a way that wasn't mean. Lila always had a laugh that could sort your pride from your good sense. She said, "Hard's fine, Hank. Impossible's another thing." In the morning, she left me a note on the nightstand. It said, "Meet me on the pier at noon, I promise," and underlined it twice. I got there at 11 with 2 hot dogs and a heart I had to hold in my chest with both hands. Noon came and went. The sun made a suggestion about patience. By 1, a storm shuffled across the water like a bully. I waited until 2. I waited until 3. At 4, a man with a skiff said he'd seen her near the bait shop an hour earlier, walking fast with a dark-haired woman. Then he shrugged in that way men do when they're telling you there's more rain than umbrella today. When I finally went back to the motel, the desk clerk told me a man had called earlier asking for Lila Palmer. That's the name she'd used to check back in. The clerk said he had a voice like someone who could make you do push-ups without moving from his chair. He said he'd told the man there wasn't anyone by that name, but the man had laughed like he already knew. I don't know if that was true. I know that I didn't sleep and that I never saw Lila on that pier. I left the next day because the world moves people along, whether they're ready or not. On the way out of town, I saw my truck's passenger door had been keyed from handle to hinge. The scrape looked like the mark of someone who wanted to remind me that even the things you think you own can be opened from the outside. I went back to Ohio. This is the part people don't want to hear in a love story. Sometimes the lover goes home and nothing changes for a long time except the weather and the shape of the ache. I worked. I learned how to rebuild a carburetor with my eyes half closed. I took girls from church bowling and held their hands like they were birds I wasn't sure I had the right to touch. I didn't tell anyone about Lila. I shouldn't have had to. It was ours. Years did their trick. I turned 25, then 30. I bought a little house with siding that always thought it was clean until a certain light hit it. My mother, God rest her, started coming by unannounced, leaving pot roasts and telling me I needed to find a wife before I ended up like Mr. Tully, who fed pigeons behind the bakery and couldn't remember his own address half the time. I dated a woman named Carol for a season. We talked about marriage and then didn't. The space where Lila lived got quieter but never quite dark. Here comes twist number 1. You think the story is boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy learns a lesson so deep it grows moss, the end. But life likes to hide surprises in the places we think we've already dusted. When my mother's lungs started to fold in on themselves, I moved her into my house and put her bed by the window. She was a stubborn woman from Marion, Indiana, who'd been poor and then okay, and never once believed in easy. She coughed in a way that scared me sometimes, and after the medicine turned her voice into something thin, she called me Henry, even though she hadn't done that since I was 10. One night, after I'd changed her sheets and poured her some water, she asked for the cigar box in the hall closet. I brought it, thinking maybe she wanted to look at old coins, or the service pin of my father's she kept like a second wedding ring. She put the box on her lap and told me the truth is a faucet you can turn off and on, but sometimes the handle breaks and the whole thing floods. Then she took out a bundle of letters tied with twine so thin you could see where it had bitten into the paper. The top one had my name on it. The handwriting hit me like a stone I should have seen. I didn't say it out loud. I was afraid it would make the room tilt. Lila's hand, neat and stubborn. On the letter, the L of my name had a loop that looked like a question mark. She said, I kept these. I shouldn't have. I know that. I just thought I was rescuing you from a storm that wasn't yours. Then she started to cry, the dry kind old women do when their bodies have forgotten what water is for. She told me a woman had come to the station a month after I got back, asking if a young man named Hank had left a jacket behind. My mom worked part-time at the ticket counter, then to pick up extra cash for the Christmas she insisted on still making big. The woman had matched the description of the girl I'd described once while delirious with flu. Hair like the last light through a bottle of RC Cola and eyes that always looked like they were about to find something worth keeping. She said the woman had a bruise hiding under a scarf and a belly that pressed soft under a coat. She asked if there was a Hank Mercer in town. My mother said she panicked, said the girl looked like the kind some trouble follows like a stray. Said she told the woman no, never heard of him. The woman had nodded like she'd expected that and left an envelope with my name on it. My mother hid it. Then the next week another letter came to the house because the woman must have found our address anyway. Mom hid that one too. The letters kept coming for a while, then stopped. She thought she'd done a mercy. She thought I'd build a life that didn't have to apologize to danger. I'm going to tell you that I forgave her. I did, eventually. But not that night. That night I read the first letter with my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled like a fast engine. Lila wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that Roy had found her in Savannah by calling motels within a 50-mile radius until someone said yes without knowing they'd just turned a page of someone's life. She said she saw my truck keyed and knew he was there, and that he was the kind of man who believed in lessons more than laws. She said she had walked past the pier and seen me waiting and felt something break that she would never put right. She said she had to walk away because if she didn't, he would do me harm I didn't deserve. She wrote that she was pregnant. She wrote that if the baby had my hands, she hoped they would always be steady. There were 10 letters in the bundle. Some told me about towns with names like songs: Biloxi, Opelika, Rome, Georgia. Some asked me to meet her at a P.O. box that no longer existed by the time I held the paper. One letter included a Polaroid of a newborn, dark hair slicked down like someone had combed it with a bird feather. On the back, "Meet Cassandra, Hank. She smells like milk and safety. I hope someday she knows you'll laugh." Lila had written it 3 months after she left. The date made the air in the room change shape. That night I sat beside my mother's bed, and I didn't know if I was a son or a man who had just learned he was a father. My mother asked me to forgive her. I told her it'd take me time, but that I loved her. She died 2 weeks later with my father's service pin on her nightgown and the radio playing a gospel station too static-filled to make out the words. After the funeral, I took the letters to my kitchen table and spread them out like a map I'd been walking blind. I wrote to every address she'd listed as a place she might be. Most came back stamped like no one had ever lived there. I drove south twice and wandered around the towns that had held her like a loose coin. I walked into churches on Wednesdays and asked if anyone knew a Lila Hart who might have called herself June Palmer. I got sorries and headshakes from people who carried casseroles and those little yellow pens. I got a lead on a church secretary in Tulsa who'd only worked for a year before going quiet as a closed shop. I followed it and found a locked door and a window with a sign about a potluck they'd had 6 months earlier. I learned to sit in my truck and listen to the way my steering wheel sounded when my hands tried not to break it. I'm not proud of the years that followed. I drank more than any mechanic working around tanks of gasoline should. I dated women and told the truth too late. I married Carol because she was patient and I was tired of waiting. We gave it 5 years of trying and 1 short summer of really trying. Then we let it go. I kept fixing cars. I watched the world turn into something with computers and phone numbers that started with area codes, even if you were calling next door. I watched people put their lives online like they were hanging laundry and happy to have neighbors look. Then Facebook found me, or rather, it found my daughter. It was 2014, and I was 54 with hands that cracked around cold weather like old paint. I'd made a page because the guys at the shop said you couldn't sell a transmission these days without a digital footprint. I posted a picture of my truck with its bench seat and a caption about how most modern cars make you feel like you need a degree in English just to change the oil. 2 days later, I got a message request from a woman named Cassandra Hart. Profile picture of a girl holding a toddler whose smile had the exact slant mine gets when someone tells a joke that shouldn't be funny. Her message said, "Hello, I don't want to scare you, but I think you might be my father." I wish I could tell you I answered like a poet. I didn't. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred and I had to take my glasses off and clean them twice. I wrote back a question. Who was your mother? She answered with a photo I had never seen, but knew deeper than I knew my own front porch. Lila in a thrift store sweater, holding a dark-haired baby. The same round bruise of a birthmark near the left ear you can only really see in sunlight, the mark my mother used to call a kiss from God. I wrote, yes. And then I wrote, I'm sorry. And then I wrote, where are you? Cass, she told me to call her Cass, said Cassandra sounded like someone who gave bad news at a town meeting, lived in Kansas City, Missouri, where she worked nights at a hospital taking vitals and sometimes sitting with the dying if a nurse asked and there wasn't anyone else. She said her mum had died 3 years earlier. Cancer. She hadn't known her father. Her birth certificate had listed blank. Lila had told her the truth in pieces. An Ohio boy, a pier, a road that ran out and then started again without warning. Cass had a box of letters of her own, some addressed to me and never sent, some addressed to no one and sent into the world by being written. She said she found my name by reading the letters until the H's and K's started to look like a pattern she could trace. She said she found my Facebook because I'd left my page public like an old man who didn't know better. She apologized for saying old man. I told her I expected to be called worse by anyone who shared my blood. We did the test because people like proof even when their hearts don't need it. The cheek swabs came and went in the mail like the world had finally built a bridge over the river I kept falling into. The results came on a Tuesday when it rained steady and slow. I read the words and they looked like a sentence I'd been writing my whole life. Parent-child. The percentage didn't matter. It was a yes that made every no I'd ever heard sound like static. We talked on the phone. I learned she likes grapefruit, but only if you salt it first. I learned she hums when she drives like she's tuning the air. I learned her boy, my grandson, was named Eli, and that he was 3 and believed in dinosaurs with the ferocity of a preacher. Cass told me about her mother, the way people talk about the weather they miss. Lila had worked at a church office for a while, then at a library, then at a dentist, where patients always came in nervous and left telling her their whole life story. Cass said Lila had called her an accident once, then taken it back and renamed her a surprise. She said her mother had a stubborn streak that made her try to fix toasters no one asked her to fix. She said Lila cried sometimes and called it allergies. She said Lila never married again. She said that whenever a police cruiser drove past too slow, her mother would go quiet and check that the back door was locked. When I finally saw Cass in person, it was like walking up to a house you know you built but can't remember the floor plan of. She had my father's ears and my mother's way of staring people into honesty. We hugged in a parking lot of a gas station off I-70, and Eli said, "Grandpa?" like he was testing the sound of the word in his mouth. I said, "Bud," and nearly folded myself in half with the feeling. We sat in a booth at a Friendly's and ate chicken fingers and ice cream like we were 4 again, and the world had never learned to disappoint. I told Cass the whole story the way I'm telling you, only with more starts and stops, because a man's voice doesn't always cooperate with his determination. She listened without fidgeting, which is a gift that doesn't get talked about enough. Then she told me something I didn't know how to hold. Before Lila died, she'd kept a small wooden box wrapped in a scarf in the back of their closet. Inside, there'd been a ring-thin gold with a tiny blue stone and a folded paper with a name that wasn't Cass's or mine. The paper said, "If anything ever happens to me, tell Hank to find Roy Hart's sister, Evelyn, in Waycross. She'll tell him the rest." My heart stalled like a bad alternator. The name Roy turned a key in a lock I thought I'd thrown away. We drove down there 2 weeks later. The town looked like a place where summer hangs on like an old song. Evelyn Hart lived in a trailer with a chain-link fence and a dog that slept with one eye open. She was a woman in her 70s, with a manner like dry biscuits, crumbly but not unkind. She let us in, made sweet tea that could have stripped paint and probably saved marriages, and sat with her hands in her lap like she had a story sewn into her palms. She asked who we were. I said I was Hank, and this was my daughter Cass. She nodded like names were recipes she'd long since memorized. Then she sighed and told us that her brother Roy had died in a car accident on a night when the road was slick and he was mean and he forgot to slow down. She said it like a weather report. She said he wasn't always a monster, then she closed her eyes like saying it made him come back to life long enough to pinch her. She told us that he had spent a couple of years after Lila left calling every church and police station and motel in Georgia and beyond, blaming her for his own storm. He'd once come to her drunk, crying about how the worst thing a person could do is take his property. Evelyn said she'd told him a woman isn't a lawn chair. He hadn't liked that. She showed us a picture of him in his uniform, and I saw the boy he might have been before he learned that power could scratch any itch you let it. Then she leaned forward and told us the part of the story that knocked the air out of me. The night Lila didn't meet me on the pier, she had called Evelyn from a payphone behind a shrimp shack, She asked if there was any chance Roy could be reasoned with, told, begged into leaving me alone. It was the first and only time she'd asked Evelyn for something. Evelyn told her to run and run hard, and then she told her something that still keeps me up. She said she'd heard Roy brag in the locker room about how a lesson sticks best when it's taught to the new man in a woman's life. A teaching lesson. Those were the words. I felt the blood leave my hands. Lila hadn't just left me because she was scared. She left because she was trying to draw a circle around me with her body. Evelyn said she'd always wondered what happened to the baby. Cass reached for my hand under the table. She said, "I'm right here." Evelyn cried, then big tears that fall hard because they've been walking around too long. She asked to take our picture like it could fix something. It didn't fix anything. But sometimes a picture holds a room together, at least for a moment. On the drive back, Cass told me that her mother had another truth she'd never managed to say out loud. She'd kept her ring because she always hoped for one last conversation with me. She had hidden it from every man who ever came near. One night, when Cass was a teenager and thought she'd be clever and stay out late, she found Lila asleep in a chair by the door with the ring in her palm like a token for a ferry ride. Cass took a photo. She showed me on her phone while we were parked at a rest stop, watching trucks pass like thoughts you can't hang on to. Lila in a thrift store chair, her hand relaxed, that blue stone winking like it knew a secret. I touched the screen, and it was the closest I've come to touching her in 40 years. You might be thinking that's the end. Boy meets girl, loses girl, finds daughter, gives world a handshake and a lesson about faith and patience and the cruel kindness of people who think they know best. But life isn't content with just one twist if it can tie two. A year after Cass found me, a message came to my channel, this channel, from a woman named Teresa who said she was a hospice nurse in Tulsa. She told me she'd been told to reach out if she ever saw my name because a former patient had asked it of her. She said the woman had been quiet and sweet, with a mind that sometimes slipped like socks on hardwood. She said the woman had called herself Lily Cooper, but once, in a fog, had said Lila, and then looked frightened like the word was a stray dog that might bite. Teresa said she didn't mean to bother me, but she felt like there was something unfinished, and she was the kind of person who stirred soup until it was done. I booked a flight even though I hate planes. Cass came with me. On the drive from the airport, the sky was a bowl turned over. Teresa met us outside a small care home with a porch the color of faded mint. She led us to a room with a window that looked out on a crabapple tree. The woman in the bed was thinner than the name in my mouth. Her hair was grey, her cheeks hollowed out like a story that had been retold too many times. But when she turned her head, her eyes did something my heart recognized. It was like the first notes of a song you danced to 20 years ago and thought you'd forgotten. I said Lila. Her hands twitched like birds startled. She looked at me a long time. Minds like that have to take the scenic route to memory. Then she said, in a voice that raked over gravel, "Hank?" like a question I'd been answering my whole life. I went to her and took her hand, and we sat like that while the world made a circle around the bed. She couldn't tell long stories anymore. When she tried, they fell off under their own weight. But she could say small truths. She said, "I kept your jacket until it fell apart." She said, "I saw you on the pier." She said, "I thought if I left you, you'd live." She said, "I named her after a book because I was afraid to use a family name." She said, "Your laugh." "I remember your laugh." She said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "You saved me." And we both cried the kind of cry that makes nurses quietly leave a room. We had 2 hours. That's what the body had left to give us that day. Cass sat at the end of the bed and told her mother about Eli and about the way he lines up his toy cars according to hours she doesn't even teach him. Lila smiled that slight smile that makes everything else look loud. When she got tired, she closed her eyes and hummed. It was the same pitch I'd heard in a motel room once, with a rattling air conditioner, the same pitch the ocean makes when it's telling you that even if it takes, it also gives. After, I sat in the rental car with my forehead on the steering wheel. Cass didn't say anything. Good daughters know silence is a blanket you can tuck around a father. We flew home the next morning. Teresa called me a week later to tell me Lila had died in her sleep, with the ring in a box by her bed, the blue stone still keeping its secret. She said there'd been no family listed, but she'd played a song on her phone and held Lila's hand until the room changed shapes. I thanked her until the words felt cheap for the weight of the thing she'd given us. So here I am, a man who tells his stories to a camera because sometimes the lens is the only eye that doesn't judge first. People ask me why I named the channel after her lies. The truth is I named it when I was still angry, when lies felt like steals. I learned later that most of what I called lies were just names she put on things to get across the day. Lila lied about her name to buy another morning. She lied about her plans to keep me standing upright. My mother lied by omission because she believed love was a barricade you could build around your son. I lie sometimes when I say I'm fine to folks who wouldn't know what to do with the truth. But here's what I learned in the end. The most honest thing Lila ever did was leave me on that pier. It doesn't make the leaving pretty. It doesn't make the years make sense. It does make a beat in the music that, if you listen close, holds the song together. If you're still with me, if you've listened to this long old story like you were sitting in my kitchen with coffee that's too strong, thank you. If you are one of the 96% who watch and don't hit subscribe, please do that now. It doesn't cost you anything, but it tells this old fella that his late-night talks into a little black lens aren't just getting lost in the static. Tap that like button so the story can find someone who needs it. Drop me a comment and tell me the thing you kept, or the thing you let go, or the piece of paper you found in a drawer that changed the shape of your days. I read them, all of them, even the ones that hurt. Before I sign off, I'll tell you one last twist. Last week, Cass sent me a picture of Eli holding a model truck. It looked just like my old Ford, the green paint, the dent under the passenger door, the scratch that warned you not to think you owned what could be opened from the outside. He'd painted it himself with the concentration of someone who knows that details keep the world honest. On the bottom, in his wobbly 6-year-old hand, he'd written Hanks. Cass asked him why, and he said, because it belongs to him. But he lets us ride in it. That's all any of us can hope for, isn't it? That the things that belong to us, our stories, our names, our bruises and our rings, and the rooms where we almost make it, can carry a few more people than we first thought. That the road ahead is long enough for a surprise and soft enough for a landing. That on some pier, in the wind, someone is writing a note to meet us, and even if they can't, the note becomes a bridge anyway. This is Hank Mercer from After Her Lies. Be gentle with yourself. Be kinder than you think you know how. Subscribe if you haven't. Like this if it kept you company. Tell me your story down below. I'll be here, coffee in hand, listening to the dark until morning comes.